The year is 479 BC. On a beach near Salamis, the tide pulls at charred wood and broken shields. The sand is black with ash. The air tastes like salt and smoke and something else, something copper, something wrong. The Persian fleet is gone, burned, scattered, defeated. Greece won. That's what the poets will say. That's what they'll carve into marble and sing in symposiums for the next 2,000 years. But right now, on this beach, there's a sound coming from the hills that no epic will ever mention. Screaming. Not the battle kind. Not the kind that comes with adrenaline and glory and the promise of a quick death. This is different. High-pitched, raw. The kind that scrapes your throat until there's nothing left but breath and terror and the awful realization that no one is coming to help you. It's coming from a tent city that stretches for miles along the coast. Thousands of canvas shelters, row after row, flapping in the wind like the sails of a ghost fleet. These aren't barracks, they're holding pens. And inside them are the spoils of war. Not gold, not land, women, daughters of Athens, Corinth, Thebes, Megara. Girls who watched their fathers die in the streets. Mothers who hid their children in systems and wells and storage jars, praying they'd suffocate quietly rather than be found. Women who thought the worst thing that could happen was watching their cities burn. They were wrong because they're still alive. And what Xerxes and his commanders did to them in the months that followed. What they systematically did wasn't mercy. It wasn't even simple cruelty. It was something the ancient world had a word for. Something our history books prefer to translate as enslavement. But that's not what it was. What happened to these women, documented in Persian administrative tablets, recorded in Greek testimonies traced in the bones found in mass graves near Sardis, was systematic, calculated, designed not just to punish Greece, but to erase it from the inside out. The question isn't whether you can stomach the truth. It's whether you're willing to remember what they endured while the rest of the world celebrated Greek victory. If you've ever wondered why certain chapters of history are told through the lens of men on battlefields and not the women left behind in the ruins, you're in the right place. Here on Crimson Historians, we dig into the archives the world forgot. The tablets buried under palace floors. The mass graves no one talks about. The online testimonies carved into stone by people who knew they'd be erased. Before we go further, if you're drawn to documented records like these stories that don't make it into Hollywood films, then subscribe to Crimson Historians. Every like, every share, every subscription helps us uncover more accounts that were deliberately left out of the narrative. Return with me to that coastline, for what happened next challenges everything your textbooks chose to tell you. The tragedy of Helix's daughters cannot be understood without first dissecting the mechanism that destroyed them. Xerxes wasn't just a king. He was the living embodiment of an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Aegean. An empire that didn't conquer through brute force alone, but through a system so efficient, so deeply embedded in Persian culture that it functioned like a second government. It was called the Harem system. But that word doesn't capture what it really was. It wasn't about pleasure. It wasn't about luxury or silken cushions or the fantasies that would later corrupt our understanding. It was about control, about taking the daughters of your enemies and turning them into symbols of submission, about breeding the next generation of mixed-blood administrators who owed loyalty to Persia, not to the lands their mothers came from. When Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BCE, he brought with him 500,000 men. Soldiers, yes, but he also brought something else. Slavers, scribes, officials whose job wasn't to fight. It was to catalog every city that fell, every island that surrendered, every village that resisted and burned. They documented it all. Who lived, who died, and most importantly, who could be taken. The girls were the priority, not because the Persians were uniquely cruel. Many ancient empires did this, but because Xerxes understood something that most conquerors didn't. You don't just defeat a people by killing their men, you defeat them by taking their daughters and ensuring the next generation grows up speaking your language, worshiping your gods, forgetting their mothers ever had another home. By the time the Persian army retreated after Salamis and Plataea, over 40,000 Greek women and children had been absorbed into the Persian administrative network. 40,000. Most were shipped east to Sardis, Susa, Persepolis. Some were placed in estates as domestic labor. Others, especially the young, the beautiful, the daughters of noble families, were taken into the royal Harem system. Not for what you think, for integration. If this moment in history doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach. That the most dangerous thing an empire can do isn't kill you. It's make you forget who you were. The beach at Phaleron, just south of Athens. Summer 479 BCE. The Persian army is preparing to retreat, but not empty-handed. Greek civilians, those who didn't flee in time, those too old or too young or too stubborn to run, are being processed. That's the word the Persians used. Processed. Like grain, like timber, like cargo. There's a man overseeing the operation. His name is Artabazos, a Persian general whose name appears in Herodotus on administrative seals found in the ruins of Persepolis. He's not watching the battle, he's watching the harvest. That's what they called it in Persian. Barrington, the taking of yield. The women are separated first, then sorted by age. Girls under 12 sent to one group. They'll be raised as servants, taught Persian, integrated slowly over years until the Greek words for mother and home feel foreign on their tongues. Women over 30 sent to labor camps in Thrace, Phrygia, places where life expectancy is measured in seasons, not years, but the ones in between. The ones aged 13 to 25, those are the ones Artabazos examines personally. A girl is pulled from the line. She's from Mega, maybe 16. Her hair is matted with dust and salt, her tunic torn at the shoulder. She doesn't resist, not because she's compliant, but because she's already learned what happens when you do. Her mother screams anyway. A Persian soldier strikes her across the face, hard enough to drop her to her knees, but he doesn't kill her. They need her alive to watch, because that's part of the system too. You don't just take the daughters, you make the mothers understand that resistance is pointless, that even their daughters' bodies belong to the empire. Now the girl from Megara is led to a tent. Inside there's a scribe, Persian, seated at a low table with clay tablets and a stylus. He doesn't look at her face, he looks at her teeth, her hands, the way she stands. He's recording details, age, height, condition of teeth, presence of scars, evidence of virginity. These aren't soldiers, they're administrators. This is a bureaucracy. An intact seal from Persepolis, translated in the 1930s by the German archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld, includes a lintha. Reads, delivered to Susa, 120 Greek females, ages 14 to 22, sorted and prepared for royal service from Athens, Thebes, and Corinth. Condition acceptable. Condition acceptable. That's how the Persian Empire saw the daughters of Helix's inventory. But here's where it gets worse. Because what happened next wasn't random cruelty. It was policy. The girls selected for the Harem system were put on ships headed east, but not all of them. Some were kept back, held in camps along the coast of Asia Minor for weeks, sometimes months. Why? Because the Persians had learned something from previous conquests. If you take a woman and immediately place her in service, she resists. She remembers, she holds on to hope that someone will come for her, that her city will ransom her, that the gods will intervene. But if you break her first, if you strip her of her name, her language, her sense of self, then she integrates smoother. And the most effective way to break someone isn't through violence. It's through humiliation, through forcing them to participate in their own erasure. There's an account fragmentary preserved in a collection of Greek epitaphs from the 4th century BCE, a woman named Clytie from Corinth. She was 13 when the Persians took her. She survived. Decades later, she returned to Greece as an old woman, and left an inscription at a temple near Olympia. It reads, "I was Clytie, daughter of Nicodemus. They took me in the year of the fire. They gave me a new name. I will not speak. I served in the house of the king's cousin for 16 years. When they freed me, I had forgotten the hymns my mother taught me. I have come here to remember. This stone will remember for me 16 years. She was 29 when she was freed, and she had forgotten the hymns. That's not enslavement, that's cultural annihilation. The camps where these women were held weren't prisons. They were re-education centers. Us girls were taught Persian, how to bow in the Persian manner, how to prepare Persian food, wear Persian dress, adopt Persian mannerisms. Those who resisted were starved. Those who complied were rewarded with slightly better treatment, and those who resisted too much. There's a mass grave near Sardis. Excavated in 1958, it contains the remains of over 300 women dated to the early 5th century BCE. The bones show signs of malnutrition, blunt force trauma, evidence of systematic abuse. The archaeologists noted something strange. Almost all of the skulls faced west, as if even in death, they were trying to go home. By late 479 billion CE, the first wave of Greek captives reaches Susa, the administrative heart of the Persian Empire. The city is vast, glittering, impossibly alien to a girl from a Greek village. Columned halls stretch higher than any temple in Athens. Gardens bloom with flowers that have no Greek names. The air smells like incense and cardamom and something sweet she can't identify. And in the center of it all is the palace complex where the royal harem resides. This is where the myth meets the horror. The word haram conjures images from Hollywood. Veils, incense, luxury. But the royal harem of Persia wasn't a brothel. It was a political institution, a place where the daughters of conquered peoples were transformed into assets of the empire. Here's how it worked. According to records from the Persepolis fortification tablets, administrative documents that survived because they were baked in a fire, when Alexander the Great burned the city in 330 billion CE, women entering the harem system were divided into ranks. At the bottom, domestic servants. Above them, concubines. At the top, those selected to bear children were Persian nobles. The goal wasn't pleasure, it was integration. The children born to Greek mothers and Persian fathers would be raised Persian, but with enough Greek blood to serve as intermediaries, translators, administrators in the newly conquered territories. It was genetic colonialism. But not every girl made it that far. A girl named Thalia. Her name preserved in a Babylonian administrative tablet from 477 billion CE. She was 15 when she arrived at Susa. The tablet records that she refused integration and was placed in a disciplinary unit. What that meant exactly is spelled out in another document. Forced labor in the palace weaving rooms, 14 hours a day, minimal rations, no contact with other Greek women. She lasted 8 months. Cause of death recorded as exhaustion. But some of the girls did survive the integration. And what happened to them is in some ways worse than death because they became complicit. There's a letter, an actual letter preserved in the dry sands of Bactria and translated in the 1970s. It's from a woman named Roxane, a Greek name. It means bright. She's writing to her sister back in Thessaly. The letter is dated to around 470 BCE. She writes, "I am well. I have learned the language. I have learned the prayers. The king's steward has taken me as a secondary wife. I have given him a son. He is beautiful. He has your eyes, but he will never know your name. Please do not try to find me. I am not who I was. I am not who I was." That is the sentence that should haunt you. Because Roxane survived, she was fed, clothed, elevated in status, she had a child, and in exchange she gave birth to a son who would grow up Persian, who would never know his mother had once prayed to Athena, who would never sing the lullabies she learned as a girl in Thessaly. This was the true strategy, not massacre. Massacre creates martyrs. Songs are written, stories are told. The dead become immortal. But assimilation, slow, methodical, bureaucratic, taking the daughters of your enemies and turning them into the mothers of your necks. Generation of administrators. And it worked. By the mid-5th century BCE, there were thousands of mixed Greek-Persian children serving in the Achaemenid administration. Some became scribes, some became soldiers, some governed the very territories their mothers had once called home. Xerxes didn't just invade Greece, he tried to absorb it. If you're still watching, it's because part of you knows this story needs to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians. Not for us, but for them. For the girls whose names were erased, for the mothers who watched their daughters taken east and never saw them again. This is their testimony, and it only survives if we refuse to let it be forgotten. Not all of them stayed in Persia. Some, very few, but some came back. In the decades after the Persian Wars, as Greek Clyde solidified their power and Persia's grip on the Ionian weakened, a trickle of women began returning home, freed by sympathetic owners, ransomed by desperate families, or in rare cases, escaped. But when they came home, they found that home didn't exist anymore. There's an inscription from Eritrea dated to around 460 BCE that tells a story modern historians rarely discuss. A woman named Harmonia returned after 12 years in Persian captivity. She was 28. She had a child with her, a boy half Persian, maybe 6 years old. The city of Eritrea refused to recognize her citizenship. Her family refused to take her in. The reason recorded bluntly in the city's legal archives. She had been defiled by barbarian touch and born a child of mixed blood. To accept her would be to accept the enemy. She and her son were turned away. The inscription ends there. We don't know what happened to them. This is the part of the story that doesn't fit the heroic narrative. Because Greece won the war, Athens became the heart of democracy, philosophy, art. The Persian threat was repelled. Poets wrote epics. Sculptors carved marble. And no one wanted to talk about the daughters who came back broken, or the ones who never came back at all. A historian named Theopompus, writing in the 4th century BCE, made a passing reference to the silent women, Greek survivors of Persian captivity who lived on the margins of society, unable to reintegrate, unable to speak of what had been done to them. He wrote, "They are like shadows. They move through the agora, but no one sees them. They were taken, and though they returned, they are still gone. The silent women, that's what Greece called them. And then over time they stopped calling them anything at all." By the time Herodotus wrote his histories in the 400 and 30 BCE, the focus was entirely on battles, strategies, the glory of Greek resistance. He mentions Persian captives once in a single line. Many Greeks were taken, but in time some returned. That's it. That's all he gave them. But the graves don't lie. Across Greece, especially in regions that saw heavy Persian occupation, archaeologists have found burial sites from the mid-half century BCE containing women's remains with unusual characteristics. Signs of malnutrition consistent with long-term captivity, skeletal trauma, and in several cases, evidence of childbirth at very young ages. One such grave near ancient Thebes contained the skeleton of a woman in her early 20s. Beside her, a small clay tablet inscribed in Greek. It reads, "I am daughter of no one. I am mother of no one. I am the forgotten. Let this mark that I was, no name, just that." So why does this story matter? Because it's not about Xerxes. It's not even about Persia. It's about what happens when empires decide that the most effective weapon isn't the sword, it's silence. Xerxes invaded Greece and lost. His fleet burned at Salamis. His army was crushed at Plataea. By every milita. Rye measure, Greece won. But if you measure victory differently, if you count the daughters taken, the identities erased, the mothers who spent the rest of their lives staring at the eastern horizon. Then the question becomes harder to answer because those women didn't die gloriously. They didn't become martyrs. Most of them simply disappeared into the administrative machinery of an empire, were given new names, bore children who grew up Persian, and faded from Greek memory entirely. And Greece let them because to remember them would have been to admit that victory came with a cost that couldn't be carved into marble or sung in an epic. It would have meant confronting the fact that empires don't just conquer land, they conquer bloodlines, languages, futures. The philosopher Plutarch, writing centuries later, said something that haunts me. We remember the battles, we name the generals, we build temples to the gods who gave us victory. But the price of war is always paid by those we do not name. The daughters of Helix paid that price, not with their deaths, but with their erasure. And here's the part that should terrify you. This strategy worked. Within 2 generations, the mixed-blood descendants of Greek captives were serving in Persian courts governing Persian territories, speaking Persian fluently. The cultural erasure Xerxes began didn't end with his death. It rippled forward for decades quietly, bureaucratically, until the line between conqueror and conquered blurred beyond recognition. That is what happens when you don't tell the stories of the women left behind. They don't just disappear from history. They disappear from existence, but not completely. Because here we are 2,500 years later reading clay tablets from Persepolis, translating inscriptions from forgotten graves, finding the online testimonies of women who carved their pain into stone because they knew some. How they knew that silence was the final death. And as long as we keep reading, keep translating, keep refusing to let their voices be swallowed by time, they're still here, not in the way they wanted, not in the way they deserved, but here. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. Not the kind written into textbooks, but the kind buried in administrative records and anonymous graves. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily voices can be erased when no one fights to remember them, then subscribe, because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced 25,500 years ago especially.